Hi there, and welcome to this week's episode of Truffle Talks. I'm James Stephen, the editor of Truffle Report, and Truffle Talks is our new interview series where we sit down with the movers and shakers defining psychedelic business, policy reform, science, and culture. Joining us today is CJ Spotswood, also known as the EntheoNurse. For those who aren't already familiar with his work, CJ is a nurse practitioner based in the state of Maine and is devoted to promoting harm reduction and general knowledge around the safe and responsible use of psychedelics, particularly involving microdosing. I'll be posting links to some of our older interviews with him beneath this video for our viewers. But CJ, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Pleasure for you to have me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. So before we go any further, I'd like you to just tell us a bit about the current psilocybin services bill in Maine. And I understand that you'll be offering your testimonial.
Yes, it's very exciting. We end up having what we're trying to do is it's mirroring the 109 initiative that Oregon has recently passed that will allow for the medicalized but not medicalized use of psilocybin as the whole fruit body. It's very exciting because it's kind of like follows a model where you don't need to have necessarily a medical diagnosis to be able to qualify, but still need to pass a little bit of background checks to make sure that you might benefit from it. But the betterment of healthy individuals as well. And it's also the other exciting part is it's looking at the whole fruit medicine as opposed to just the medical version of psilocybin being the psilocin. So that way it's the whole fruit body, so it has all the other constituents of the psilocybin that's in there, which may have other effects with it, the entourage effect. And also it can cause the cost can go down significantly by using this medicine. So it's a very exciting initiative we're looking at. Hopefully it will pass. It's gaining a little bit of traction and we'll see where it goes.
All right. And what will you be telling the legislature or the board when you're offering your testimonial?
Well, my approach is I like to say the old talk of doing the same thing over and over again is the definition of insanity, expecting different outcomes. But what we've got going on here in this mental health pandemic and epidemic that we've got, the medications that we have and the approaches that we're using aren't necessarily that effective. And I think that, having these other options, I think we can be progressive enough to have them, try them, see how it goes. I think that in other states, we have lots of issues with, things getting held up in legislature and back and forth. But here in Maine, it would be a nice social experiment because we have a small enough number of people here that we can actually try to get these things launched and going.
Mm-hmm. All right. So backing up a bit, just to recap for our followers who haven't heard of you and what you've been doing, how did you get interested in psychedelics as a nurse practitioner?
Well, I've always been kind of interested in psychedelics as a general, but it was about 4 or 5 years ago, I ended up having a patient come into the emergency department who had been using psilocybin. We found out after the fact, but when he showed up, he was altered. He was an older gentleman and looked like a first psychotic break. Mm-hmm. As we found out more, he was trying to use, actually it was the penis envy strain of psilocybin, and had a bad reaction to it. At the time when I talked to him, it was a couple of months before Michael Pollan's book came out, How to Change Your Mind. So I ended up, when I learned about it, I'd always heard about psychedelic use and different uses back in the old literature, but never went very in depth to just scratch the surface. And when I ended up looking some of this up, I went in and found out about Dr. Stephen Pollack's work, and we're looking at psilocybin medicine, who actually, if anyone wants to read Hamilton Morris's story on it from Harper's Magazine, Bloodsport, it's absolutely fascinating about his murder. But I started reading about this and just seeing this absolutely life-changing medications in general, all these psychedelics. And it was just very interesting. And then Michael Pollan's book came out and found out a little bit more. But I ended up going in and I applied to do a talk at the American Psychiatric Nurses Association to talk about psychedelic medicine, not thinking anything about it and not thinking it would actually even be picked. But lo and behold, when I did get picked and went and talked about it in Ohio,
you got a response.
Oh, well, it was completely sold out. When I walked up to talk, there was a standing room only all the way around the room. And I thought people weren't even going to want to go to see this, because here I'm talking pro drugs, the exact opposite. Mm-hmm. And the rest of the week, I had people coming up to me just saying, "Oh my God, it was such a great talk." Or, I had people coming up and apologizing because they heard it was good and
they didn't get the chance to go.
They didn't have a chance to go. And I was like, I think I'm into something here.
Yep.
And just all these people that had talked about how they had experiences and where it was. And I was like, I really need to follow this, I think.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just say that is something we've encountered a lot of too. That's the reason, we're about a year and a half into doing Truffle Report now. And the response we've gotten isn't just that people are interested in it. It's that people from every walk of life are interested in it for one reason or another. And if I may comment on American politics for a moment, it's one of the few things that we've seen with a truly bipartisan support these days, is that there are members of both parties in various states working together to try and put some legislation for it. How successful it is varies from case to case, but it is there.
Well, that's where I kind of found it interesting too, because I've talked to a couple of people here in the state as we're having this coming up to legislature. And while I was talking to a couple of groups, there really isn't any opposition to it. The biggest opposition so far has been, I don't know about this, I want to learn more.
Right.
And some of the people who aren't involved or don't necessarily see a huge problem with it, they're kind of standing behind the, well, you don't bother me, I'm not going to bother you, civil liberties piece, and just saying, why not have this access? Which I find really exciting, seeing with the American politics, everything is so right and so left, but people are just kind of really going, this is your right to have this, and right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness.
It's a plant. It's a fungus.
It's a fungus. Learn more. Let's see where we can go.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, in that note, who are your patients or clients? Who is seeking you out as the EntheoNurse to learn more for harm reduction purposes, to learn about microdosing? Obviously, you get guys like me calling you up, but
I do. Well, my microdosing kind of came about spontaneously. That new movement to it was because I ended up, as I've been doing a lot of different educational groups and doing a lot of different presentations, I ended up getting in contact with someone who she was doing microdosing coaching per se, and getting a lot of questions. And when she was talking to a friend, she knew her friend, I'd done some projects with him, and said, "Hey, have you ever reached out?" Because she was getting questions about drug-on-drug interactions and what's safe with this. And she's like, "I'm way over my head in this." So when she reached out and asked me about going into it, I was kind of skeptical with the whole microdosing, the idea that here's a placebo or all the other kind of questions that you see. So I started doing a little bit more of a deeper dive and realizing a lot of people are giving guidance and talking without having a huge amount of background per se into it, other than, hey, this is what I've done and let's recommend that, which is good in some aspects, but in the other aspects.
If people are transparent about the fact that it's anecdotal in their experiences, then I don't necessarily have a problem with that either. But I feel it's the sort of thing you really have to disclaim loudly and often.
Oh, absolutely. And if you look at we don't want to cause any harm, which here I've got, you've got people who are giving this coaching advice like it's medical advice. And it's like, we got to slow this down and kind of really take a bigger look at it before you just disclaim, this and this doesn't interact. Where are you basing that on? So that's where I'm working on a project with her, which we call the Microdosing Magic Mind. I'd start working on this little guidebook to kind of go along with the process. And when I worked on that, it came up to this 100-page little guidebook that kind of led to one thing or another. And I was like, I'm into something here. There's more to this than what it is. And I think that, if we're going to get this to people, I want to make sure that this is going to be, bigger than what it is. So I reached out to a couple of publishers, and kind of my thought process right from the get-go in it was, here's this guidebook, here's how to kind of do it and kind of do it safely, and not causing any harm. And in there, I put in there, I'm not giving any medical advice, talk to your medical professional about this. But then that leads to the problem of, where's the medical professional going to turn? So I ended up putting that into the information, just kind of like, bring your book to your medical professional, give it to them, let them read through. Here's what I'm basing my results with, what the interactions are and why, just like I would with any other medication, and kind of leaving it up to them to be like, this might work, this might not work.
Mm-hmm. Based on that person's medical history.
Exactly. Individualized care.
Yeah. The way it has to be for any medication, just like it should be.
That's how I feel it as.
Yeah.
Yep. I approach it as, here we have a substance, and if I had generic drug XYZ, what would it interact with? Where would I go? And approach it that.
Okay, so how have you seen, like, I think we're into something interesting here, because there is sort of this explosion of information out there. How have you seen it change? Like, are we getting better at this? Are organizations like mine helpful? Are we, I just saw an article today that was shared by another psychedelics publication saying, could psychedelics be the answer for homelessness or something? And just shit like that makes me shake my head and roll my eyes. But are some of us getting it right? Is the quality of information out there getting better?
I think so. I think the biggest thing is we have to look at is approaching it, substances, so any psychedelic substance, any substance in general, really, is not a panacea for all of the world's problems. And we have to remember that, correlation does not mean a causation as well. And I think we're learning a little bit from the ill wills that has happened with the marijuana movement, where people are, well, this is curing this and this and this for me. Well, okay, I guess it's, let's look at, is it helping you? Do you feel better? Okay, then maybe you can make that argument, but it doesn't necessarily mean that for everyone, and everyone's not a cutter approach.
I like myself a CBD drink. We have those here in Canada. Yeah, enjoy them. They're relaxing. I'm not going to claim they cure cancer. I've seen that thrown around, and for a long time. And yes, I think I do. It's a line as journalists that I find we have to walk carefully, because there is genuinely so much exciting research out there for so many different conditions that we get to say, like, oh yes, LSD might do this, psilocybin might do this, ketamine might do this, but we just have to be very careful to disclose, when the research is published, what stage the trial is at, who the control group was, and who the patients were, or another thing. Because something interesting I talked about with a professor at Tripper, the Tripper program in UCLA San Francisco, their psychedelics research program, is that the subject pool for these studies is often very pristine from a medical point of view. They don't pick people whose interactions might complicate their results. And in the actual practical application of psychedelics, you're going to get those people a lot.
You are.
And that's why you do what you do, I would say.
Yep. Well, and I found that, like, in writing my book, I was looking at, the hallucinogen protocol that was set up by Johns Hopkins a number of years ago, was very, no blood pressure over this, no that. Which at the time, if you look at it made sense at the time because of the date, but now we're moving, I think, 8 years out from that. And it's exciting to see, as those studies have been concluded with those blood pressures, or someone with this or with that, some researchers are getting a little bit more comfortable with them. So they're starting to push the envelope a little bit. We're starting to see people that might have a little bit of hypertension being included in some specialized research. And I think that it's going to be exciting to see as some of the research gets pushing a little bit with, especially like bipolar depression. Because that's the one area I think that we're going to see. I'm very hopeful that we'll start seeing some results and some research on. I know Dr. Benjamin Mudge is looking at ayahuasca and looking at different ayahuasca brews with the different constituents within the brew and how it might be different. Because here we have a diagnosis, bipolar depression, that is notoriously difficult to treat psychiatrically because of the medications can cause more harm, inducing mania, things like that. But then the other side of the coin is, without treatment, people are literally taking their lives because they're suffering without it. So I think it's, we need to kind of walk that tightrope of, what could happen, what's the risk, what's the benefit, and not go too slow, but not go too fast either. And that's where it gets really difficult with all of these substances. At least here in the U.S., we have everything is considered
Schedule
1, which makes it really difficult because you don't have access for any of the research. You don't have access to conduct the research. So it's difficult to kind of really parse out. But that's where I'm excited that as this legislation's going and pushing forward, we're going to start seeing some different stuff coming out. And that's one of the big things I'm really hopeful for. I'd seen where Texas had made a bill looking at medicalized for PTSD for psilocybin for veterans, and the state is putting $1.4 million into that budget.
Yep, there's a new research center coming up at a campus in Austin for that specific purpose.
And you think of it, when you look at especially the plant medicines per se, like, and I know psilocybin is not really a plant, but it's still a
fungus plant.
Realm,
we'll throw it in there.
Look at it this way. Psilocybin would never be passed by the FDA here in the U.S. because it's natural and there's other chemicals in there. It's always got to be the pure form of psilocin, which, if you look at the comparison to marijuana, and I don't want to keep crapping on marijuana per se, but you look at marijuana, when the FDA approved Marinol a number of years ago for people, the synthetic version of marijuana for the THC, you weren't seeing as good research, you weren't seeing as good results with people taking the Marinol because it didn't have the CBD in it, but no one knew about it at the time, really. So
speaking from the Canadian perspective, we now have the blanket federal legalization. The medical side of cannabis has generally been a disappointment.
Yep.
And that's just, that's how I feel about it. I know a lot of other people who feel as soon as we had the recreational door open, it just kind of got chucked to the side, and and here we are with our absurd overproduction. And I live in a province where we lost $60 million selling weed legally the first year somehow, but that's politics. That's not cannabis.
Yep. Yep. It's you look at these substances,
but it could play out that way with psychedelics too. It could. It's not hard.
Cost of these? No, it's not hard to produce, to grow psilocybin. It costs literally pennies, to grow. If you have the chemical stuff to make LSD, it's notoriously inexpensive to make if you have the precursors and stuff like that. So we've got these substances that cost nothing, which I think maybe is problematic to the the pharmaceutical industry as a whole. Maybe I don't completely go with that the pharmaceutical industry is pushing against anything.
No, I think my opinion, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is that psychedelics in the medical commercial way are going to be a service economy. And that seems to be the way this is headed. And even the titles of some of the psilocybin services bill.
Yep.
In that way, because there does have to be, and we want there to be, an appropriate clinical infrastructure, therapists who know what they're doing and respect their patients' boundaries, which is a whole other conversation in psychedelics.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Well, I think it's going to be interesting because, I mean, if you look at the like MDMA, right? We have this substance that can have all these healing properties, and and I'm not saying that using these substances in a different world like Burning Man or going to a festival doesn't have a healing quality to it. But you're not going to see where we're getting rid of improvements, because the rest of it is, it's just a drug. It's just a substance that does facilitate some sort of change. Mm-hmm. But what we do with that change is what really makes the work happen. It's, incorporating what we learn and doing the integration work afterward, or being able to have that conversation with the therapist before to have that rapport built to be able to address things. If it was just a matter of just dosing everyone with psychedelics, we would have seen much different things long term. Arguably, that's what some people wanted to do. But to get the true healing for problems and mental health concerns, or whatever it might be, whatever you're trying to treat and make improvements, you gotta have a little bit of a game plan other than just dropping whatever it is.
I mean, my interpretation of the research that exists so far is that if you have these mental health conditions, you are not best served by taking psychedelics all the time. You're best served by taking 1 or 2 doses a year, maybe, and actually working through it and integrating and working through it properly, and speaking with a therapist about it, and integrating these lessons you learn about yourself into your life.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think to go back to the part we were talking earlier about with the substances and how they work and how they kind of work differently, and the how we talk about it, and you guys are putting out this information so people learn about it. I think there's still a little bit of hesitancy in some parts of the scholarly work that's out there, the peer reviewed, that really doesn't know what they're doing with it completely yet, or they're still kind of dipping their toe in the water to see.
And honestly, who could blame them? If I were trying to work on stuff like this right now in a academic setting and just trying to get results, and looking out my, I hate to say it, but ivory tower-ish window, and seeing a few hundred publicly traded companies now popping up like mushrooms after a rain, looking to grab onto every paper that comes out to try and turn it into a product or something that they can attract investors with, I would also be cautious about saying what I would want people to do with it.
Well, that's where I encourage people to read the stuff instead of just kind of getting the bullet point from it.
Primary sources are important. You heard it here, folks.
They absolutely are. And that's kind of what I talk when I talk and present about psychedelics and stuff. Well, I really, there's one study that came out, New England Journal of Medicine, comparing psilocybin to escitalopram, the medication Lexapro, which when you read it, on the surface, or if you just read the abstract, it says, the improvements are not clinically significant from the comparison of the groups, which, okay, I guess on the surface, you're absolutely right. But if you actually, sit down, and I guess maybe I'm a little OCD when it comes to that. I get out my red pen and go through and take my own notes and stuff. But when you look at the improvements in the psilocybin,
there's no OCD in academia. You're rigorous, sir. You're rigorous.
Rigorous. You see improvements in the psilocybin group of 70% versus the 48% with treatment as usual. Maybe it's not exactly significant, but to me, if I'm 30 more patients out of 100 are having some improvement, I'm going to call that as a little bit of a win.
Yep. At least worth looking at again.
Absolutely. And these are small trials, they're small studies. I understand that, but then when you have remission rates of 57% with the psilocybin group a couple of weeks out versus 28, once again, I think that's something worth keeping an eye on, and not exactly shouldn't be in 2 sentences of, well, the improvements are insignificant. And I think that's kind of really limiting us. And I understand why the authors did that. I get it. But I think it's worth, looking at the other part of it is where I find really interesting, because I talk with my patients every day. When I when I prescribe medications, I say to them, all medications I prescribe have a purpose. That's why we take them. But all medications also have a side effect that come with it as well. And kind of part of what we need to do is find where the healthy balance of the side effects are not worse than what we're treating, and you're able to have improvements from it, because I don't want to cause any harm, even if it's just what you perceive as harm. But the medications that we have that are out there have some really bothersome side effects for anyone that's ever been on any antidepressants per se.
Mm-hmm.
So when you had the people who had replied in that the head-to-head study, the psilocybin group said the participants had found a improved ability to cry, feeling more compassion, feeling more emotion, feeling more pleasure, and feeling less drowsy. So it's the exact opposite of the side effects that you see with treatment as usual antidepressants. But then you have the antidepressant group that are saying that they're having more anxiety, more dry mouth, sexual side effects, and blunting of their emotions. I think you have to kind of take it all and take it with a grain of, or even a pile of salt, and really look at those.
To me, that just sounds like a question of perspective. Is the cure for depression blunting the emotions or dealing with the emotions? Is what I take away from that.
Well, and that's a conversation I have almost every day with a patient, where they just say, with some of the medications I've taken now or taken in the past, I'd rather be depressed and feel emotions than feel nothing at all the time.
Yeah.
Which is completely reasonable. I don't want to take away all of your joy and enjoyment in life, because that's even more depressing, but you don't feel it.
Yeah.
I guess.
That's then we're just soma robots.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I guess that leads me to my last question here, and we can start wrapping this up. Going back to psilocybin services, what do you want to see Maine implement? How does that, the work you do play into that? Could you see yourself becoming part of a state psilocybin infrastructure?
I hope that that's the movement that we're getting. I'm hoping that we get the access to it. I'm going to be starting, actually, I've enrolled into CIIS's program for psychotherapy, psychedelic psychotherapy and research, starting here in April in Boston, to ultimately be able to hopefully have that as something that I can implement when legal here. So yeah, absolutely. I've seen the healing potential. I've seen the healing potential that people have had from these substances. And I do see myself going forward with that. The problem is here in Maine is we have a huge barrier to mental health treatment in general. So I think we're going to be slowly coming about and getting that change, no matter what it is, because there's so many wait lists to get mental health treatment across the board. But not having it at all is a problem. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful we're going to see it. I'm hopeful we can also figure out a way to end up having increased access to people so they can get to it, not just those with insurance that'll pay for it. Because not to go back to the politics, but here in the United States, we don't have the advantage for everyone being able to access services and be able to have health care. So really, it comes down to insurance, and if you have a job or you have some other insurance. So I'm hoping, because the cost is going to be expensive with psychedelic therapy because of the time it takes and the time it's going to be to get it unrolled. So I'm hopeful that we'll have that. I don't know how it's going to happen, but at least if we have the psilocybin being natural substances, inexpensive to grow and to have, that'll at least draw down some of the cost.
It removes some of the barrier to access.
It does.
It's not the whole picture, but it's helpful.
It's helpful. Yep.
All right.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I think that's all I had for this week. Thank you again, everyone, for tuning into Truffle Talks. Once again, I'm James Stephen, the editor of Truffle Report, and this has been CJ Spotswood, the EntheoNurse. You can find Truffle Report online at truffle.report or as Truffle Report on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and LinkedIn, and Truffle_report on Twitter, Instagram, and Reddit. And finally, for any of you who enjoy the sound of my voice but can't stand my face, all of our Truffle Talks episodes are now available in audio-only format on Spotify. See you next week.